Andrew, it's good to see you, brother.
Great to see you too, Mark. Should we do somewhat of a, let's say, recap perhaps of what we spoke about last time and
Yes.
remind our listeners what the Tree of Life is, what the Sephirot is? And
Yes.
last time we talked about Kether, and we're going to
Right.
move on and talk about the 10
Yeah.
Sephirots.
Yes. 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 And maybe, Andrew, just to locate everyone, on the one hand, we want, kind of a teaching, a sharing to be what they call evergreen, not related to particular times, dates, and places, but life is always contextual. And so we're on December 10th, it's 2023. We're in the middle of the Israel-Gaza war, right? And it's been enormously intense. As many of you know, I'm both American and Israeli. With deep connections in the Palestinian community. I don't live in chat boxes on that issue. I shared a physical home with the Palestinian family for many years. And very, very deeply close to that community. So we just came out of, Andrew, a conversation in One Mountain, those of you who were there, I'll check in the chat box. Give us a yes if you were there, maybe, right? A quite intense conversation, about, thank you, about, this notion that we need to both respond to the culture of death, which is jihad, in its tragic form, not in its beautiful, liberated form. We need to respond and not allow the world to be held hostage to the depravity of October 7th. And at the same time, and this brings us to the Tree of Life, and at the same time, there's a spark of the sacred in jihad itself that needs to be liberated, which is almost an impossible sentence to say, right? So on the one hand, we need to respond fully, right, to, the rape and dismemberment of women and the sexual mutilation and violation, as Gal Gadot, aka Wonder Woman, has pointed out, correctly. And Gal lived near me in Israel. We lived in the same, hood, and we were involved at the same time. I guess she probably grew up in part watching the television show I was doing there. So, Gal pointed out that, believe all women seems to have stopped, when it comes to kind of the worst horrors we've ever seen of the abuse and degradation of women on October 7th. So that we're talking about horror and evil is absolutely true. And I don't want to say a word that in any way mitigates that. But there is an and. And the and is that there's a spark of the sacred in jihad. And Hamas is a distorted expression of jihad that needs to be utterly stopped. At the same time, in order to create a future coherency, right, a future coherent world story of value, which is the universal love story, and if we can't bring the spark of the sacred in jihad, the broken jihad to the table, we're lost. So right. If give me 1 second, I'll give it right back to you for the whole time. But just give me, if I can, if you're up for it, I'll just take a minute to tie that to the Tree of Life, right? Because that maybe, brother, will take us back inside. So there's this image of all is God. Alt is Gott and Gott is alt. All is God and God is all. All is Goddess, Goddess is all. Then there's a withdrawal. So there's infinite divinity. Step one. Step two, in the interior sciences of Solomon, there's a withdrawal, a divine kenosis, a divine emptying out. 3, there's a request by the divine voice for anyone to mute themselves who's not muted, so we have a clear channel. So 3, there's a divine shaft of light that bisects the void. The void is the circle. The line bisects the void. And there's this explosion of reality, the manifest. 3. 4, the manifest organizes in 10 Sephirot. right, in 10 vessels of light. And a vessel is a structure, it's a pattern. 5, the light is too intense, right? And this is a kind of a medicine image. It's a realization. The light is too intense to be held in any one structure of light. So all the structures of light shatter. They all shatter. And each light, each Sephirot, each divine illumination attempts to be its own fully coherent and comprehensive world. It's almost like each ideology, each Sephirot is an ideology, which says I'm fully total and coherent, and I'm omnicompetent at explaining reality. So all of the 10 vessels shatter. That's 5. 6, the broken vessels, the broken shards spread through the world, which is broken vessels and broken hearts and broken ideologies and broken hallelujahs, right? That's 6. 7, the job of the tzaddik, which is all of us here, those who are trying to articulate the new story of value. It's the entire intent of the Center for World Philosophy and Religion. It's the intent of Parallax. It's what drives Andrew. It drives me. It's what drives so many people who are here, all of us today, is we want to be the tzaddik. We want to be the righteous one. And the righteous one is actually, as we're going to see, one of the 10 vessels. It's the image or the energy of the teller of the new story, the reweaving, thrusting forward to reweave a new story is the tzaddik, right? The righteous one who tells a new story. But the job of the tzaddik is to go to all the broken vessels and to liberate the spark of light in that vessel, right? And so what we want to do is we want to, even in the degraded versions of jihad, which are a complete broken vessel, there's still a spark of light to liberate. And if we don't liberate that spark of light and weave it into a new story of value, we won't succeed. So when my colleague Sam Harris correctly, draws the obvious bright moral lines between a pluralistic Israeli democracy and Hamas, he's completely right. But when he fails to realize that underneath this cultural expression of jihad, which is degraded, there's actually a spark of the sacred in jihad, right? Which Sam can't recognize because he's fundamentally a materialist. So therefore, the notion of the spark of the sacred doesn't exist. But we need to recognize actually that in the tree of life, all the Sephirot break, all the 10 illuminations break, but there's a spark of the sacred that can be liberated. So that's just maybe as a context to weave what we just did and where we are in the tree of life. And now, Andrew, what you and I are talking about is in the new configuration, when the Sephirot are reanimated and reconstructed. That's what Andrew and I are talking about, the reconstruction of the Sephirot. That's where we are. The first is that there's 10 Sephirot, which are one underneath the other. That's the Kabbalistic image. 10 Sephirot, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and a linear line going down. And then the Sephirot are reconstructed. Maybe we still have the image from last time that we put in the chat box. I don't know if anyone has that. Maybe Krista does, maybe not. Either way is fine. But the Sephirot are reconstructed with several lines and with interconnections between all the Sephirot. Maybe if we can pull that up and put that in the chat box, great. If not, we'll send it to everyone. But in the classical image of the tree of life, actually you see these 10 Sephirot, which are no longer in a line, but they're in these 3 lines. And then in a good diagram of them, you see the interconnections between all of the different Sephirot, right? And so what you and I are talking about is about the reconstructed tree of life. And what Andrew and I are trying to do together is actually get underneath the kind of formal jargon language and go into the inside of the realization of each Sephirah, which we said last time is a story of divinity, and understand what's that unique story. And we talked about Keter as the story of silence, right? And now we want to look at each of the Sephirot and see what is that unique story? How does that story relate to all the other stories? How does that story live in me? How am I an incarnation of the tree of life? How is all of economics and politics an incarnation of the tree of life as a core model of the interior structure of reality? So that was a recap. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Oh.
As you were speaking, I was thinking about this idea of The question popped into my mind: how to liberate the spark from the most degraded being, the most, the terrorist, whatever. And then it occurred to me that is in us, right? We have that in us. We have that potential in us. So part of liberating the spark would be to notice our own murderous shadow. And this is kind of a Jungian, point.
Beautiful.
What do you think about that?
That's gorgeous, right? So let's stay with this, right? It's all such a holy and broken hallelujah. So one way to go, and Andrew, with permission, I'm going to talk about you in the third person. So we'll be in the study hall. So the way it would be in the study hall would be, and Rabbi Andrew says, to liberate that spark is to find the murderous rage that lives in me, right? So let me, if I can, with permission, brother, let's play with that to find the murderous righteous rage that lives in me, right? In other words, is there something, and this is very, very important, there's always somebody in the chat box, often someone that I love and honor dearly, who takes a pacifist position, when the position is, you never kill. And I think, I don't want to do an entire conversation about the immorality of pacifist thinking, right? Because what it says is that the highest value is living as long as you can. The highest value is life, or this individual life in this space. And whenever you think that there's a higher cause, right, you actually say, wow. And it's, if you think there's a larger field of existence, what the hero recognizes is, let me be brutal for a second. Tony Stark at the end of Avengers Endgame, gives up his life, because he's the hero. He realizes there's something to give up my life for, right? So is there a murderous rage that lives in me as a holy spark, right? Which is, I'm standing for some larger field of value, right? That's been violated. So for example, right, and I apologize, and we're going to get hard here, right? If I could have gone into the Waffen SS headquarters that were running the concentration camps of Bergen-Belsen and Dachau with a machine gun, right, personally, myself, and taken out, right, the SS, personally, myself, not through someone else, murdered them myself, I would have done it. Without question. Without question. I mean, this was the most, I want to be really clear about that. And I would say that any one of us who would not have done it, including my delightful friend Becca, right? Anyone else who would not have done it is actually dissociated from the sacred, right? So that's the murderous rage. Now, that then gets degraded when you stand for a false cause, right? In other words, when you say, okay, I'm going to strap myself with explosives and blow up a school bus, right? So in other words, but the notion that there's something that's worth standing for that would require me, right, to actually put a machine gun on, right, and take out Mengele, right, who dissects human beings in slow torture in Auschwitz, or gas chambers that kill 12,000 people a day in the most brutal way. If I could, with a submachine gun, take them all out, I would, and I would be dissociated from tenderness and from the sacred if I didn't. And so that's the spark of the sacred. What jihad is sensing is there's something that should be stood for.
Yeah.
And that's utterly degraded. And the reason someone like, Sapolsky, I've got his book behind me, Robert Sapolsky. Why did I say Sapolsky? Robert Sapolsky, for example, right? It's a book on kind of illusion of free will, or kind of, the whole kind of school of mid-19th century, right, rejectors of religion, right? The reason they were so afraid of religion was because it's so easy to have a false cause, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
Wow. Wow, deep breath, right? Yeah, deep breath.
So perhaps like thinking of the story here of Kedar and Chokhmah and Binah. Let's say the top three
Yeah.
stories. You call them stories, or
Right.
vessels. Uh, can I just give you my brief understanding
Take it
of
away.
what they are, and
Take
see
it
if
away, bro.
it follows, and see if we can relate it to even to what we were talking about
Yeah.
here? Because
Yeah.
so Keter being the silent pregnant space, something emerges from that, and you've called that a line, or maybe it's radiance, maybe it's brilliant, just, and that would be Hokmah, and then the womb which gives birth to something would be Bina. That's kind of how I've understood it. So it's you have a crown, you have the masculine and the feminine, and so maybe the Hokmah is this intensity, and the Bina is how that intensity is shaped. So if am I, does that work for you?
So let's no, totally. That's first off, two things. One, and I apologize for just we're out of order here, but Andrew, it's just very good to see you. I'm happy to see you. I'm
Mm-hmm.
happy that time of month.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I always jump right into the
No,
topic
you're
without
great.
the
You're great. You're great.
preambles and all that.
You're
But
great. You're fantastic.
anyway. Mm-hmm.
So let's dive right into that. So maybe just everybody for a second, of everyone who has a chat box, you can take a look for just 1 second in your chat box. There's a couple of versions of the Tree of Life. So we talked last time about Keter, right? So I'm going to look just, there's too many there now, right? So if you scroll up, I'm just going to look at one of them. Whichever one you look up, at the top is Keter, which is crown, right? And then there's a diagonal to Chokhmah, which is wisdom, right? On the right side, and on the left side there's Binah, which is understanding. So that's what we're talking about. So this is called the upper triad. This is the upper trinity in the Tree of Life, just so people can just feel it for a second. Okay, so you've got this place of Keter, which Andrew and I so enjoyed our last conversation, talked about Keter based on a very, very deep read. And we talked about how you read sources last time, so I won't recapitulate that. But it's not said this way anyplace openly, right? Now that you can only understand what the realization of a particular Sephirot is if you actually have that realization, and then you recognize the realization in the Sephirot, in this description, and then as you read the description, it deepens your own realization. That's how it works, right? So if you don't have the realization, you'll just read, it's just words. And by the way, I would say, and I mean this tenderly, most of the people who wrote books on the Sephirot didn't have the realization. You can just tell in 1 second. If you're an erotic mystic on the inside, you just open it for a second, you say, okay, this person has no relationship to the realization. And then you can open a different book and you say, whoa, they got something. So I'm going to tell you something wild. A kind of somewhat complicated, complex figure whose life was one perpetual scandal as it was reported. I have no idea what was true, like Aleister Crowley, right? Actually had something of a realization. Right? In other words, like, right, he wasn't right. He actually, he's in the game, right? Now he's a little dangerous because he got lost in all sorts of ways in games of ego and power, it looks like, but I don't know, I wasn't there. But you can read lots of the formal books and you realize these guys had no realization. So when we talked last week about 2 weeks ago about Keter, or 3 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago about Keter, we said Keter is the crown, but the crown is the unspoken, right? It's the silence, but it's not the silence of absence. It's the silence of presence from which everything arises. It's the ground, right? So now Andrew's now taking us, and I apologize. I'm slowing down just I think slowly. Okay, so I apologize. I think very, very slowly. So Andrew takes us back. Okay, so Keter, we said, is it's the silence of all silences. It's the ground of silence, which is most full. It's most pregnant. It's the deepest silence between beloveds, where you don't want to break the silence with anything as superficial as a word. Now, does everyone get that? Okay. So now what Andrew says is, and I think his intuition is completely right, so I just want to build on it with his permission, is that silence births something. That silence is creative, right? It's a fecund, F-E-C-U-N-D, and I've been looking for an opportunity to use that word for a long time, right? It's this very pregnant, perspicacious silence that births something. Now, what does it birth? So it births as follows. So first off, it births a flash of inspiration, right? It's this fertile void is a good word. It births this flash of like, let's do that.
It's a lightning. It's sometimes called a lightning flash, right? It's sometimes
right. It's called in the account of the chariot. It's a lightning flash, but what it is just to locate it in our bodies. It's. I was on the phone with Claire, and we were thinking about the unique self course, and we said, let's do the unique self with parallax. Isn't that a great idea? Right. But it's even before that. That's too late of an idea. It's this flash of creative potential where there's the seed of an idea that's not yet unpacked, but you can feel the seed of it. Right? Yeah. Seeding of an idea, which is the explosion of the phallic trembling, right, which impregnates reality, right, in this, and it's all there, it's all potential, it's all possible, it's all coded in the semen. It's this flashing explosion, and there's an intense pleasure in that explosion. There's an intense joy, right? And we know that both, but there's certain biological evidence, there's also mystical interior science traditions, that when there's an explosion in the feminine, at the same time as the explosion of the masculine, there's something different in the nature of the impregnation, right? So when these two explosions happen of orgasm or mugzam, literally orgasm is playing with the Hebrew of mugzam, the extreme light. So you're at the extreme light, which is before creation. So reality is seeded with a new possibility. And that's why it's gorgeous. So that's one. And then there's this structure in reality, which is called Shechina Ila'ah, the higher goddess, which is Binah, which is the third Sephirot. So the first is Keter in the middle. On the right, you have Chokhmah, which is the explosion of knowing. So Chokhmah, spelled backwards, the Kabbalists point out, is Koach-ma, the power of what? The power of what is what? Right? Like what? Right? It's like, right? It's like, right? It's the seeded possibility of inspiration, right? Ted Castaneda, right? In other words, it's this explosive possibility. And then Binah is the womb. Binah is always the womb. It's always the womb. And the womb is Rechem, the womb, which is radical compassion, which receives the explosion of Chokhmah. Chokhmah is always a line quality. We call it masculine, but it's a line quality. It busts into reality, it explodes, but then it would disappear until it's received. It gestates in the depth of the higher goddess, and the higher goddess brings to fruition through the self-organizing wisdom of a self-actualizing cosmos, right? It has an intention, it has a plot line, it has a direction, which brings the coded seed of an idea, right, into the beginning of fruition before it's even born. It's all before birth. Does everyone get that? This is all before, everyone get that, friends? This is all before manifestation, right? So that's what's happening here. Yeah. And maybe just one last thing and then back to you, which is, this is really, really important. This is a coupling. This is an eros. There's an eros here at play. So this is a description of fuck. It's a description of what's called zivug, coupling. It's not static. It's not neutral, right? This is a divine eros in the Zohar, in a number of passages, 4 or 5, right, calls this trei rein delomit parshin. These are the two lovers that never split from each other. So Chokhmah and Binah are what's called constant zivug, constant fuck. constant eros. They're not that they're in this constant state of Chokhmah exploding and Binah receiving the explosion in every millisecond, even underneath time. So it's not a field of arousal. It's a constant explosion. And so, for example, one name, right? Let's say, what would be the physical exteriorization of that, right, in the manifest world? This is all before the manifest world, and then it incarnates in the manifest. This is all pre-manifest, and then all that's pre-manifest incarnates in the manifest. An example of that would be electromagnetism, the strong and the weak nuclear, and gravitation. Those are fields that are in the Higgs boson field. It's in constant play, and it's constantly exploding and seeding, right? The field of pure potentiality, the quantum foam, the quantum vacuum, what's also sometimes called, although it's not exactly the same thing, it's not this, but the 0 point field, it's a constant explosion of pure potentiality, and it's also constantly received and constantly gestating, right, new possibility. And it's what, right, Zohar, you and I looked at this on Friday. It's what Whitehead calls the lure of becoming, right, or the lure of creative emergence. So the lure of creative emergence, what he calls it in Process and Reality, is this constant this constant eros of Chokhmah entering Binah, exploding, Binah receiving the explosion, gestating the explosion, and bringing it right to the moment of birth. Right? That structure of reality, that is not a reductionist materialist universe.
Right. I mean, which also has Keter as the background in a sense, as the totality,
and this this field of Keter, the silence of presence, right, is always birthing the four forces of reality. And that silence of presence, though, is not just awareness. And this is where my friend, what the fuck's his name? Gafni, that dude, is always arguing with Buddhism. And I think he's right, for lots of reasons, which is that it's not a field of awareness, right? Keter is a field of pure eros, right? And anyone who's ever really meditated for real knows in their own realization that actually that when you go into a deep state of shunyata, right, let's say in one tradition, right, shunyata, right, this deep emptiness, it's not awareness. Awareness is just one filament. It's full eros, right? Yeah. Silence of presence is the deepest eros in the world.
Well, that would be Rigpa in the Dzogchen tradition.
That would be Rigpa in the Dzogchen tradition.
Completely dynamic, expressive, rather than a static awareness. Yeah, for sure.
That would be Rigpa in the Dzogchen. Exactly. And so much talk about awareness, and if I could put it in kind of erotic terms, right, and just a good image. So this is what awareness does to your field. You don't have to quote that in the tape, right? It's like, really?
Well, because you're just observing. You're not in the game,
and it's not true to you. It's not true to you, right? In other words, I'd like to be for all eternity in awareness. Slay me, right? I mean, slay me, right? I'd like to be for all eternity in the field of eros. I'll have what she had, right? I mean, there's a different realization, and so that's so it's Keter, which births Chokhmah and Binah, and Chokhmah and Binah are the field of zivug matmeret, constant fuck, constant eros, right? Which is the very ground of reality, and that's why this matters so much, because Keter, Chokhmah, and Binah are the beginning of what we call in CosmoErotic Humanism the field of value.
Okay, I don't want to be defensive of Buddhism here, but
what the hell, go for it.
but I'm going to be defensive of Buddhism here, because the Yabyung is the couple interacting in a constant fuck. So that's what it is, and it's described as Mahasukha, great joy. It's not described as a static field of just awareness, in at least in the tantric traditions.
No, absolutely. So, there's the tantric Buddhist tantrism is extremely, extremely important, and the Yabyum is absolutely critical, right? I would just say two things, and this is a critique of Buddhism and of the lineage of the wisdom of Solomon. So let's just critique them equally, right? Which is both of these things have been basically marginalized, right? In other words, even when you read contemporary teachers of tantric Buddhism, I won't mention any names right now because it doesn't help, right? Although it's tempting, right? Right. But what they do is they actually, even in tantric Buddhism, most of the schools, right, are kind of interpret the tantric move as taking place first off purely in the mind field, right? The drop, the drop which you're now merging with larger circle, etc. Right, and it's a purely interiorized mind field when actually it's a mind body field number one, right? And there's this enormous attempt in virtually all tantric traditions, right, to actually de-emphasize, right, the living eros of the field. But you're absolutely correct. And by the way, the same thing is true, let me be clear, the same thing's true in the lineage of Solomon. Right?
Yeah, well, I agree with you in terms of how much of it is, interpreted, but I think it's lost its soul when it goes in that direction. I think it's lost its soul,
and I think we need to reclaim the heart of Buddhist tantrism, right, and of the tantrism of the wisdom of Solomon, right, and they're not overlapping, but they're pointing, and there is a sense of there is kind of a tantric Buddhism that actually in some very particular strains that actually have a deep sense of an enacted, right, somatic experience, right, and obviously Yab Yum, in a certain sense, Yab Yum, the images of Yab Yum speak much louder than any of the reductive interpretations. Right. And as the images of Yab Yum appear both in Buddhism and obviously in Hindu Tantrism, right, in different ways, they're incredibly important and sacred images. Right. And can you imagine putting Yab Yum at the center of a church, right? Won't get you far, or putting the two cherubs, which are essentially intertwisted, at the center of a synagogue, right? Sufficient to get any pastor or rabbi fired. Right.
Yeah.
So there you go, right?
Oh, but why the hell? Why is that? What's going on here?
So this is so important, right? In other words, we think that, and this is where failed love stories are so brutal, my friend, right? And this is where the jihadi story falls short in a horrific way, when it demonizes the field of desire. But our notion basically is one of two things. And I think it's so important. Either we have a closet notion that it's a reductive materialist cosmos, in which we're just making up meaning. And in which case, if we're trying to create a moral universe, desire's in the way, right? Because desire makes people crazy, right? And actually breaks down the moral universe, possibility one. Or we view the world, right? So we would call that scientism, right? Or we view the world as essentially what's called a prosidor, right? An anteroom, right? A hallway, a corridor that's leading to the next world. And in the next world, we're freed, right, of the predicament of the body, and we're able to live in purity, in which case also we need to bypass desire and bypass the body. So both of those world stories, right, would require us, right, to actually deflect the dominating impact of these paroxysms of desire that T.S. Eliot described. But if we actually truly...
just an interjection. I was thinking about how the notion of the afterlife is so terrible. It's not that there's an afterlife, there's a continuity, but there's nothing after life.
Right. No, the afterlife is a terrible word, right?
Yes.
And it's actually a continuity of consciousness. And what essentially what non-dual humanism is saying, and most of the non-dual traditions got this wrong, right? They got confused about it, but they were in the right direction. They all intuited something of it. They all had a spark, even in the broken vessels of, right? All of non-duality had a spark, which is it's one reality. It's one cloth. It's one fabric. The unmanifest is inherent in the manifest in Buddhist terms, right? The world to come is inherent in this world in Hebrew wisdom terms, right? Infinity, right, is embedded in intimacy, and intimacy is embedded in infinity, right, in the CosmoErotic Humanist terms. There's no split. It's non-dual. It's one. It's one breath. It's one heart. It's one consciousness. It's one world, right? It's one love. It's one fuck. It's one desire, right? And desire in Cosmo-Shaivism, it even stirs in the infinite. Once we get that, we can reclaim the dignity of desire. And until we reclaim the dignity of desire, we're going to have a broken politics and a broken economics, right? And a broken world of broken vessels. So reclaiming the dignity of desire, because reality is desire at its very core, all the way up and all the way down, including divinity. And how do I know divinity desires? Because here's Andrew talking to me, right? And as divinity clearly desired, right, to be our host, Claire, and to be Becca, and to be Andrew, and to be Mark, and to be Shahati, and to be Krista, and to be Dr. Kincaid in the next room, right? In other words, divinity desired to individuate uniquely. That's a big desire for infinity. That's no small desire. That's a shitload of desire.
So there's a kind of enlightened dualism in a way, like, because you have to have two to desire, or you have to have, I mean, there is no ultimate two, but there still has to be differentiation and uniqueness for there to be desire.
There's a paradoxical, the way you would describe it would be, there is non-duality. And this is the way our dear friend Sally Kempton would teach Cosmo-Shaivism. Whenever Sally and I talked about it, I could say it in Kabbalistic terms, but let's invoke Sally, right? Which is that there's essentially non-duality, right? Then you go to the appearance of duality. So level 1, non-duality. Level 2, duality. Level 3 is duality, non-duality.
The duality of non-duality, yeah. The non-duality of duality and non-duality, or the duality, yes.
They're paradoxical. They're paradoxical.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
They live, the one and the many can't be disambiguated. And in Kabbalistic terms, where I'm more at home, is I can teach Cosmo-Shaivism, but I don't, even though I know the structures decently well, because I can't feel them. The same way I feel them in the interior sciences of the lineage of Solomon, which is, in every moment, there's being and becoming. There's this being that's underneath, and then there's this becoming, right? This desire to create, and everyone can recognize that. You can recognize there's this deep beingness in cosmos. It's the ground from which everything emerges, which doesn't want to go anywhere and doesn't want to get any place, right? And by the way, if you want to access being, can we just do a 10-second direct enlightenment experience just for fun, right? Because enlightenment's fun, right? So if you want a direct experience of the quality of being, you don't want to meditate, just think of the word fun. Fun is a quality of being. The reason I want to have fun is not in order to do something else. It's to have fun. I want to relax into beingness. Right? That's actually what fun means, right? In other words, we think fun is just superficial, but fun is this desire. Let's just have fun, right? So, and I could think of 6 pop songs which have the word fun, at the center. But also, if you go through, I did this once like 20 years ago. You go through for a talk. You go through the dating sites, right, Andrew? When before there were dating sites, there were dating ads and papers, and we're now dating ourselves, right? So in all of the ads, it would say looking for, and the word fun always appeared. The one word that every single one of the ads was fun, was the universal word. So a friend of mine, right, Dennis Prager at the time, right, gave this, lecture kind of mocking people's desire for superficiality, for fun. But with deep respect to you, Brother Dennis, he missed the point. People weren't saying we want to be superficial. They were saying we want being. And being means, God, just the utter delight of sitting by the fire and just chatting and just being together and just raising our glasses in a toast and skiing down the mountain or being in the ocean, right? It's just living for its own sake is the quality of being.
And a playful kind of mischievous quality of, humor and all these things, right? That it's just there.
Laughing, right? Quality, right? For its own sake, right?
Yeah.
Another quality of becoming, right? And becoming is this desire for something to happen. Becoming is filled with desire for the next step, right? And so both of those qualities, right, live together, right? Non-duality, right? It's all just, we're just here. There's no place to go. There's no place to get. It's all divine, right? It's all right. I'm in the play of it, right? And on the one hand, on the other hand, there's someplace urgent to get. There's a plot line. There's a desire that's driving us forward, right?
Was that Chokhmah and Binah? Are we, is it,
Well,
is it that?
it's not quite Chokhmah and Binah, right? Because
Yeah.
Chokhmah and Binah are more like, in other words, the second we move from Keter, let's do it this way. Above, we have the tree of life. What's before the tree of life? Before the tree of life is infinite no-thingness, infinite being.
Yeah.
It's why I was talking to a dear, new student friend, beloved in Holy of Holies this week, and he's a beautiful young man, and he was talking about, kind of the quantum field, right? And kind of analogies and explaining it mystically, and we shared together, and we shall not say his name. He's a beautiful young man, right? And what I shared with him was, and I think he got it, I saw it in his eyes very deeply, is that the quantum field is not being, right? The quantum field is not ein, right? In other words, if you remove all quantum fields, you still have spirit. That's really important to get, right? That's why physics is, don't do physics and spirit. So no
Did
physics.
you say it's not ein? Is that what you said? Like
not ein.
and stuff?
Right, it's not, right? In other words, the quantum field is not ein, although it's identified by that in pretty much every New Age book. In other words, if you get rid of all quantum fields, which means all the manifest is gone, you have pure spirit still there. Right? So that's important, right? And that's the point. It's all grounded.
Ein, okay.
Right? In ein, it's grounded in that which is before Keter. It's bounded in pure beingness. But then that pure beingness, that pure infinity, if you will, right, seeks expression and incarnation, seeks intimacy. So then Ein Sof, right, begins to become the tree of life. It begins to manifest as Keter, and Keter is the liminal space between the infinite and the intimate. It's really a beautiful way to get Keter. Keter is the liminal space between the infinite and the intimate. Isn't that beautiful? Right? Both of these things, duality and non-duality, exist at the same time. And as you said, Andrew, we can access them in us. When I access in myself the desire for fun, now for me, fun means honestly, fun. The most fun thing I could do is just sit with close friends around the fire and just chant and talk, right? And just be in love together, just chanting and eating dinner together. And, it's kind of like that scene, the final scene in the movie Don't Look Up, when there's like a minute left and the world's about to explode and the meteor is about to hit. What do? They all sit dinner and they raise a glass, because what else is there to do, right? So it's the joy of, for me, what's most quote unquote fun is the utter joy of friendship, like with a radically open heart, loving each other for no purpose, not in order to make a revolution, right? Not in order to write a great library, right? Just the utter joy of it. But that's being. And becoming is...
Seems like becoming has suffering involved in it in some kind of a way.
Becoming has suffering, my friend.
Whereas being does not. Being is it's just being. It's wonderful.
That's right. Which is why, I did a dialogue with my beloved friend, Ken Wilber, on evil. And, we had a deep talk about this. And Ken's response to evil was to go into the field of being, and there's no evil, there's no suffering, which is true. And Ken and I kind of went at it for a couple hours, a very deep and beautiful conversation. But so from the perspective of being, there's no suffering. So when Zushiv Anipol, the student of the two generations of the Baal Shem Tov, is kind of in this abject, broken house, and the masters walk and they say, Gewalt, right? You're suffering so much. And he looks at me and he says, what suffering? He's like, right? He's in pure being. Becoming is, we have to write a great library. She needs us. We're partnering with her, right? She needs us desperately. We need to focus. We need to make the right choices. We need to discern. That's not busyness, right? That's, and it's urgent,
maybe there's kind of a sense of service involved in that as well.
Service and urgency.
And urgency.
There's an ecstatic urgency involved, right? And
Yeah.
you know who Jerry Judd was, Andrew?
Oh.
Jerry Judd died at 100. He's a beautiful man. He was one of the pillars of the human potential movement in America. When he was about 98, I think, or 97, I did a conversation with him, and he invited me to teach at his retreat center where I taught for 10 years wisdom schools. And some of us, we met there. And so we had this dialogue, which maybe Krista, we could send to people or put in the chat box, on urgency. And I mentioned the word urgency to him, and he was in this pure non-dual bliss at 98. And he got furious. Urgency has no place, right? And that's, he was like, right, no urgency.
Yeah.
No, Jerry, there's room for urgency. There's ecstatic urgency, right? There's becoming. And so holding those, that's duality. So duality, we just did a very big thing together. Duality is urgency, and it's becoming, right? Non-duality is pure being. It's the ground of silence, but it's also in fun. It's that desire for just pure being in all of its ways, and they're inter-included with each other. They're included. So Chokhmah and Binah, right, which is Chokhmah and Binah is the beginning of the creative principle at its highest level, even before manifestation, right, is the intimate coding of cosmos that moves, right, it's what moves the world, from Mud to Mozart, from bacteria to Bach, from dirt to Dostoevsky, from slime to Shakespeare. And let's see if we can continue this iteration with a few more letters.
Yeah, that's becoming. Right.
Right. That's right. That's correct. That's correct. So let's see how far we could go with this, because we're having a good time, right? Right. But that's Chokhmah and Binah. And can you get? I mean, I honestly, I'm at a loss. And in other words, I understand the rejection for a moment of spirit in the face of evil. I mean, I understand that the void is real and should live in us, and there should be a little atheist in all of us, because that's also holy. It's also part of non-duality, right? In other words, just like there's a spark of the sacred in jihad, there's a spark of the sacred in atheism, right? And that wouldn't exist.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
When I see a poor person by the road, I shouldn't think God's going to take care of them. I should be. There's no God. It's just mine to do, right? And at the same time, so I'm there, and at the same time, I don't actually understand how some of my colleagues can and it's the mainstream position of scientism, can actually imagine that the world is empty at its core, right? In other words, that there's no Chokhmah and Binah, there's no Keter Chokhmah and Binah, that there's no tree of life. And the tree of life is also, the roots of the tree of life are in the infinite, and then the tree of life is upside down and then reaches down into the earth. That's the image of.
Right.
I mean, reality is so obviously coded with meaning. It's so obviously coded with meaning.
Yeah, a meaning saturated.
It's right, and it's not. In other words, the way Zak and I talk about it in CosmoErotic Humanism, right, is that, value is like space and time. You can't avoid them. They're not like, is there value, isn't there value, right? Yeah. There's value in every sentence. You can't construct a sentence without value. It's the same reason why, I mentioned Sapolsky's dismissal of free will, right, which I'll talk about in a later book. I want to criticize this book for lots of reasons, but he's the kind of the ultimate expression of there's no free will, and it's ultimately absurd. Yeah, and it's absurd. Let's get. And it's obviously an erudite book in the extreme, right? So Sapolsky's great, and I'm sure he's a great guy, and I'm sure it'd be delightful to have over for dinner. So Robert, you're invited, brother, right? But you and I can't have this conversation right now, in this very second, without having an implicit dimension of freedom. Meaning, if my experience was, right, that actually, there was a mechanical script here where it seemed like I was free, but really every word I'm saying is based purely on antecedent causation. And every word that Andrew is saying is based purely on antecedent causation. Then there's no
Well, this was what I mean. Gurdjieff would call machine man, right? Is a
right,
mechanical person, and he's the person trapped in a world without free will. But that is a kind of hell, isn't it?
that's what,
That,
and that's
there's no being in that, is there? I think
right, and
being
that's
is one of the reflections of free will, because there's
totally
a.
that's what Allen Ginsberg called Moloch, right?
Yeah.
Machine, right? And that
Moloch, yeah.
and Scott Alexander, wrote his meditations on Moloch, right? Which was about machine man, right? But here's the thing: it's not the machine. It's not that it's wrong, and in some sense, and it's more subtle. And this is where it gets very beautiful. So, wow, 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 this is exciting. So, wow, this is exciting. Okay, so in one view of the tree of life, Chokhmah is ratzon, is the expression of pure will,
Mm-hmm.
right? And Binah is hechreach, it's pure necessity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's will, freedom, and necessity, right?
Okay.
Necessity is the laws of the universe, right, that cause the explosion, right, to manifest something. There's these inexorable laws that it meets.
Is that the same thing as the idea that it's a tree of mercy and severity? This is one
that's going to get
translation.
further. That's farther down in the tree. That's a little further down in the tree.
But I thought the whole pillars was, this is the pillar
Right,
of
right.
mercy.
You could look at both pillars, right, as the question is compassion, freedom. So, but let's bracket that.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
too big of a topic, right? But but something like this. So did this is just a great way to do it. Did Andrew and Mark decide to do these dialogues, or didn't we? It's a very simple.
No. Yeah.
Right, right. So
Yes.
what's the decision we made? Well, on the one hand, it was, I mean, I think at a certain point a few years ago, Claire seeded the idea, right? And then there were a couple of other people called us. And then Daniel, right, kind of made it. I know there was a bunch of players there, right? And we obviously had a choice, right? And we could have decided after the first dialogue not to do it. So obviously we were choosing, and if we weren't choosing, it would feel weird. It would feel like we were coerced and mechanized.
Yeah.
So obviously we chose, and obviously we didn't, right? Obviously this had to be, and it couldn't have been any different. And these conversations needed to happen. Now, then every word we say in the conversations, on the one hand, obviously we're freely choosing what to say. And if there wasn't a dimension of freedom, there'd be no joy in the conversation. And on the other hand, everything is emergent from the entire sacred autobiography of Andrewness and the sacred autobiography of Markness and the sacred autobiography of everyone holding space who are pouring their energy into the space. And all that's coming together, right, and creating an inexorability, a necessity, right, something that couldn't be any different. So Ratzon is radical freedom. Chokhmah is radically free. Binah is the inexorability, the hechreach, the prior causation, that the laws that cause things to go as they do. And Cook writes, Abraham Cook, right, modern evolutionary mystic, interior scientist, writes that he has a series of 12 passages, right, which he talks about ratzon and hechreach, freedom and necessity, being utterly inter-included with each other, utterly inseparable. So we both chose and we didn't choose.
So I'm just wondering about Binah being the womb, and that seems to be related in some sense to becoming, right?
Yes.
And that's why I sort of thought of it as being severity, because there's suffering in the reduction of this pure freedom into form and into existence, right? Just like the womb is, it's a beautiful space, but when birth is bloody and painful, and it has to be, the whole process is painful. Is painful as well.
So what you're pointing to is, and we'll get to this next time. You're pointing to these two dimensions of the tree of life, and it can be described as you absolutely correctly say. If I can just repeat you for a second with permission. So Andrew's talking about a tradition which says that you can look at the tree of life as pure necessity, or pure gvura, or pure constraint, right, or pure severity, right, however you want to say it, meaning it's operating according to a constraint and a set of boundaries, right, that that birth reality. And it's also pure freedom, pure chesed, pure overflowing free love, if you will, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can look at the tree in both ways, but in fact, the tree is the merger of those two, right? The tree is the intersection of complete constraint and complete overflowing freedom, right? The merger of those two together create reality.
Yeah, the dance between them, or the
dance between them. But from our perspective, as we just stay in Chokhmah and Binah, because I think that's our topic, at least for this week, is Chokhmah and Binah, right? We've talked about it in a number of ways. Maybe we can introduce it one last way, right? Which is Chokhmah is Eros and Binah is value, right?
Okay.
Right. So Chokhmah is Eros, which is this field of pure potentiality, which is always exploding. Eros is always exploding. Eros is the constant desire of cosmos, because we're already in desire. We're already out of the Ein Sof. Ein Sof, there's no desire. There's been a stirring of desire, which is manifested Keter, the pure ground of silence. The pure ground of silence gives rise to the very, very nascent beginnings of the seeding of manifestation in the still unmanifest. And Chokhmah is the exploding desire in every second, which is exploding and ecstatically, seeding reality in every second, right? And then that's received, that's Eros, pure Eros, and that's received by pure value. And value means there's a plot line, there's an ought, structure.
Oh, great.
Pattern, right? And so it's now this is gorgeous now, my friend, right? So when Chokhmah and Binah come together in constant union, we would call that Eros value, not Eros value. Not that Eros is a value and value is erotic, but this is a whole level, right, everybody? This is Eros value. This is the new word that we introduced in the book that's about to come out. Zak and I did on, in the field of value. So we introduced this word Eros value. So Eros value is, we don't talk about this in the book, right? It's nowhere mentioned, but Eros value is the constant merger of Chokhmah and Binah, is the constant merger of Eros and value that are so interdigitated, so intertextured, so interincluded that they can't be split. It's constant explosion of impregnating reality with constant new, radical, joyful emergence, right? And then this constant receiving of it into the field of value and its plot lines that are moving towards ever more value, ever more goodness, ever more truth, ever more beauty. That's Chokhmah and Binah. Wow.
That gives me insight into why people demonize desire, because it's just Chokhmah without Binah, but Chokhmah and Binah are a singularity, and when you bring those two together, then there's no demonization of desire.
If that wasn't your best sentence this week, Andrew, then you've had an incredibly good, right? That's a fantastic sentence. So let me just repeat it for everyone, because it's crazy beautiful, right? And completely right. I mean, it could not have been more beautiful, right? So I'm just going to be, your interpreter for a second. But what Andrew's pointing to gorgeously, brilliantly, is that the demonization of desire is the identification of desire with Eros without value. That's completely correct. That is exactly what we're saying in CosmoErotic Humanism. So you are now part of David J. Temple, who's the author of all these books, right? Right? It's exactly right. In other words, what we do is we view that we think there's a clash between the erotic and the ethical. And I wrote an article in a magazine called Tikkun. It was a cover story called The Erotic and the Ethical, where the point was that Eros and ethics are one. And the point was exactly what you just said, right? That people say, oh, desire? The second we say desire, what emerges in our mind when we say desire is a breakdown of ethics, right?
Yeah, we've lost ourselves somehow.
Right. The first thing that we think desire, we think, that's a breakdown of, no, right? That's literally in our body. But actually, desire is the quality of Eros, and Eros is the desire for ever deeper contact and ever greater wholeness, right? That's the Eros equation. Desire equals Eros equals the experience of radical aliveness, seeking, desiring, ever deeper contact and ever greater wholeness. Now, ever greater wholeness means that separate parts come together as wholes, which means they have to be in right relationship with each other. And right relationship with each other means ethos, means value, right? So you cannot split eros and value. You can't split them. They cannot be split. Any attempt to split eros and ethics degrades your own self, because we are eros and ethics as one. We are unique configurations of eros value.
And that is the cosmic problem at the moment, or that is to summarize, if you would summarize why people are so ill in the modern world and in their
this split, this exile of eros from value and of value from eros, right? And so therefore the arousal or the awareness or the participation, right, in this primal union of eros and value as one. They can't be split. Eros and value are one. Who is, right? Who is Andrew Sweeney? A unique configuration of eros value, which means a unique configuration of desire ethos. That's actually who we are. Right? And therefore, if you shame someone's field of desire, instead of liberating the spark of desire that might sometimes be in the broken vessel and returning it to source, right, then you shame their very existence, and then you break their spirit, and then they are living in a field of emptiness, which they then go to cover over with every form of pseudo-eros and addiction and degradation, which is exactly the structure of the universe today, that's what we can only heal with the new story of eros value. Breath. Wow, we did.
Yeah. That's pretty amazing.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I guess that is your mission, to try to communicate this, and or our mission, all of our missions.
And maybe, brother, maybe, I mean, I think it's definitely, tell me if I'm overstepping, you'll correct me, right? I think it's too much to step into the next two Sephirot now. I think this is a natural pause. If we did it last time, and if it's okay, and either next time you give us a song, right, and this time I'll chant, or this time you give us a song, next time I'll chant, but let's end with some version of chant and practice if we can. So
absolutely. I don't have a guitar at the moment, so anyway, lead us away. I need an axe.
You're up for next time?
I can't promise it, because I need my instrument. I'm buying a guitar at the moment, so.
All right. So Claire, we're going to stay with him on this, okay?
I want to hear your chanting for the moment, and then.
But next time,
maybe you can twist my arm and do it one.
Next time we will. We're going to work on that, and I'll just ask everyone to mute, just so we can chant together, because we figured out that we know how to put a man on the moon, but we haven't figured out how to create, recordings that can allow us to chant together. So if just everyone mutes themselves, then we can all chant where we are without the. So the chant is, Ashrei, mad joy, Yoshvei, to sit deeply, Veitecha, in your home, to sit in the God house. Od Yahalucha Sela, there's more joy, there's more delight to come. There's more to come. Ashrei. And Christoph, if we have the words, we can even put them in the chat box. Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mark.
Yes. Od Yahalucha Narine Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha Od Yahalucha Od Yahalucha Narine Ashrei Magi Yoshvei Yoshvei V'teicha O Hallelujah Yod Hallelujah Narine Ashrei 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 Magi Yoshvei Yoshvei V'teicha O Hallelujah Od Hallelujah Cha. 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 It's good to be with you, brother.
You too.
You too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good to be with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, everybody.
We'll have
a free next month. Imagine.
Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah.